That's Debatable is sponsored by MB&G. MB&G is specialists in the esoteric world of vehicle and furniture warranty insurance, delivering quite marvellous customer service, prompt claims payment, and a highly developed understanding of how to deliver these products in a way that is both compliant with the regulations and attractive to customers. To find out more, call Paul Smith, the Managing Director, on 07887 501 441. That's 07887 501 441. Hello and welcome to That's Debatable, the weekly news podcast of the Free Speech Union. Welcome back to our listeners and to our viewers. And Jan, what are you wearing today? Look at that.
I'm wearing my Free Speech Union hoodie. One of a number of quotes that you can get. Proud to stand up for free speech. But you can also get really minimal ones with just the logo or other quotes. I can't remember. There's the Voltaire quote.
Yeah.
I can't remember what else. There's a few others. But if you go to our website and go to the shop tab on there, you can go through to our website. And if you order before Wednesday, the 18th of December, you can hopefully get delivery in time for Christmas. But you can also buy gift vouchers as well, so that you can buy those at any time and then give them to your loved ones, the outspoken uncles, the sulky cousins, anybody that you need to.
Yes, put them in the corner on Christmas Day in their
That's
bubble
right.
hat.
They can just
or their
sit there
Christmas
looking grumpy or cheerful, making outrageous jokes while wearing their hoodies.
Absolutely.
So, I should mention this is all down to John Jolly from Magic Promotions, who are a fantastic company that he's a gold member, and he offered to help us produce merchandise. So we're really, really grateful. And we're going to meet him on Tuesday night, our comedy night, because he's coming. That's good.
That's coming up very rapidly. Actually, this will release around about lunchtime on
20
Tuesday.
20 tickets left. So if people go, when they hear this, straight away to our website, they'll probably be able to snaffle up the last tickets.
Yeah, that's the key. Well, there's an article I wanted to start with today, Jan. It was in the Telegraph. It was written by Douglas Carswell, who would be familiar with many of our listeners. He was the Conservative MP who then was re-elected on a UKIP ticket. And he now lives in the US. He works for one of the groups in the US called the Mississippi Center for Public Policy. So he's written an article and he starts it with a fairly grim conclusion. England is no longer a free society. The old country is descending into authoritarianism. And then he lists a number of things that have happened. So there's a shopping list of news items that Douglas Carswell starts that article with. But that conclusion, Jan, is pretty brutal. I mean, and he goes on to say England was the country that gave us common law and free speech, but you are now liable to be punished if you write hurtful words about individuals who belong to certain protected groups. Is that, do you think, too brutal a conclusion that Douglas Carswell has come to there about the state of England, and that we are now a warning to the world rather than a light to the world?
Obviously, I think things are really serious, and I do think. I'm heartened in a way by the fact that free speech has become a huge issue, which I know sounds a bit odd because it's become a huge issue because it's being undermined. But at the same time, it's become a rallying point for an awful lot of people as a kind of umbrella issue, which I think that's a real positive, actually, weirdly enough, because the worst possible scenario is that our free speech is being undermined and then nobody notices and nobody pushes back. So I think the fact that there has been a pushback, of which the Free Speech Union is very much a part of that and leading from the front, I think, for the past 4.5 years, I think that's a positive. And I certainly, when I see some of the perception from abroad of what's going on in the UK, I don't know, I feel like it's slightly over the top. I mean, this idea that you can't say anything and that people are being locked up willy-nilly. I think it's certainly the case that the law is being misapplied, that there's new laws being introduced that are really detrimental to free speech. There's a cavalier attitude towards free speech amongst large sections of the elite. and that the very principles of free speech are kind of now mistrusted by a lot of people who run things. And I think all of that absolutely has to be campaigned against and fought. But what I'm really wary of is fatalism, because the thing I'm heartened by is that there's a fight on. And I think that's really positive, because I think it's an energizing thing that is the best possible issue to fight around is free speech.
It's a
And I don't,
fundamental, it's an axiom, isn't it? And
yeah,
it's a
yeah,
really simple axiom. If you cannot speak, then you cannot debate and you cannot fight for your other rights. It is
no,
in that
that's right.
sense utterly
That's
foundational.
right. And it goes all the way down to our understandings of our attachment to democracy and our attachment to conscience. As we said last week, it predates, in a way, it kind of predates democracy, these kind of ideas, or popular democracy anyway. The idea that the individual, there's a moral right to the individual being able to express themselves. We discussed that in the last podcast. So the fact that these things are becoming widely discussed and much more widely understood, I think, is all to the good. And I'm against fatalism ever, because I think it's paralysing. And also, when you put things in perspective, I mean, you look at Syria, for example, in the news this week, and you think, well, we're so far away from that. We're so far away from Iran. We're so far away from China, that there's huge space for turning this ship around. And I think that's the way we have to look at things, really. Because I think if we accept that things have already gone so far that you can't say anything anymore, then we might as well give up. I think the fact is it's all to play for.
But I would rank those examples you gave, Jan. I mean, you say Iran, you say Syria. Syria is obviously in utter turmoil at the moment. But I would say that we are closer to China than we are to Iran, for example. So I think it's a scale, I suppose, is what I'm saying. We're much further from Iran, but we are heading in the direction of a Chinese social credit system in all sorts of ways. So, yes, I agree. I wouldn't want to be fatalistic. But I guess my point is this fight comes at a cost. This fight comes at a cost. We are now at the stage of the fight where 20 years ago, you could have just done this and debate and fight for around issues, and it wouldn't have come at the same cost. Now it's destroying lives and really hurting people and hurting families and people are tripping up the tripwire when they're not expecting it. But I do agree with what your underlying point there, though. I think, Jan, definitely.
I suppose it's also that over here, on the one hand, you have the law and you have the state coming in at people, and then on the other hand, you have all these other kind of regulatory structures, like whether that's the workplace, other kinds of regulatory bodies that we might go on to talk about, taking a more authoritarian turn. But then we also have over here, which I think is very new, is this self-censorship amongst just in social interactions. So I always say to people, yes, but you know exactly what you're not supposed to say, don't you? If they deny that there's a free speech problem, and they do, they know what they're not supposed to say. And the very fact that that's a phenomenon means that that's because they've seen what lessons there are out there as to who's been made an example of, whether that's J.K. Rowling or whoever that might be, or somebody in the workplace that they know themselves personally. It's that idea that, oh, well, we all know what we're not supposed to say. And that's incredibly, if we go along with that, I think that's incredibly dangerous, because that just means there's no need for the laws. It just happens in our relationships with other people. So that's equally where there's lots of space to open things up again, because you just have to say, well, look, this is a question I want to ask, and I think this is legitimate to ask this question. Do you really disagree that we can even consider this as something open to debate? And I think we have to keep pushing back on those kinds of things.
Yeah, agree with that completely, Jan. Shall we move on to talk about an issue which I know is very close to your heart in this whole area, which is one of the things Douglas Carswell mentioned, this IPSO decision and this rebuking of the Spectator magazine for calling a trans author a man who claims to be a woman. You probably would be better placed to take us through this, I think, Jan, actually.
Yeah, well, there's lots of interesting things about this story, and one of them is that IPSO, the what's it called, the Independent Press Standards Organisation,
Yeah.
was supposed to be the lighter touch response to the Leveson inquiry, compared to Impress, which was the sort of heavy the heavy regulator, which has proved much less popular amongst publications, thankfully. So I think Ipsos governs 2,600 publications. So it's a kind of self-regulatory body, whereas Impress has got far fewer. I can't remember, 217. So Ipsos is the one that IPSO is one that covers the vast majority of the British press. And it's, as I say, it's supposed to be self-regulatory. And up until now, it's limited itself, or up until a year or so ago, it limited itself to questions of fact. This changed, and initially in 2023, it made a decision against Jeremy Clarkson in the Times, which for a piece he'd published, I think, the year before, which is where he made a really kind of long, very vicious piece about Meghan Markle. I can't say her name, Meghan Markle, likening his kind of fantasy of her being pelted with mud and excrement, like the scene from Game of Thrones. And it was incredibly vitriolic. I was quite shocked when I read it, actually, in the Times. But it received 25,000 complaints to IPSO. And I think it was pulled down. And but that was the first time that opinion had been judged against by IPSO. And then in this case, which was decided upon and announced last week, where Gareth Roberts, who's a Spectator columnist, the complaint against him was upheld. And that was based on, I think, a much more blurry kind of category, because on the one hand, it's Gareth's opinion that Juno Dawson, the author, is a man who claims to be a woman. But I suspect the complaint was made partly on the basis of it being factually wrong, because Juno Dawson, I think, has a gender recognition certificate. But also, I think this idea that it was discriminatory and pejorative as well. So this additional idea of insult and offence, which of course takes us into very open territory of anything being complained about. So yeah, it's very worrying, and I think there's been a heartening response by people like Michael Gove and Fraser Nelson and many others. I think the Times editorial was very much against it, and people.
There's been a lot of solidarity, hasn't there, Jan? People have said, "No, I stand with Michael Gove, who's the new editor of the Spectator." People have written the Telegraph and other outlets saying this is, as you say, a regulator who's meant to stand up for things that are matters of truth and moving into the realm of public taste. And that is a very slippery slope, a very thin end of the wedge, and has to stop right now, I think, is the point that all of these editorials are making, that it has to stop right now. And press freedom is one of the 5 pillars of the Free Speech Union as well, isn't it, in terms of we recognise that this has to be at the heart of a free society. And I genuinely find it surprising that press freedom is now under attack like this, and that these big names, these big dogs in the world of the press, are having to stand up and say, no, you've really overreached here. And I think there was talk of some, because it's a voluntary membership organisation, some publications saying we may well have to leave the umbrella of IPSO. But of course, the trouble then is that if the pendulum swings one way, then the pendulum will swing in the other. If there's an outcry at that, then there could be further legislation. And under the current government and the current mood of the government, who knows where that ends. So it's a really tricky nut to crack. But it's both surprising and not surprising that IPSO have actually done this, I think.
Yes, and I think things are obviously already moving in that direction after Leveson, and it was already a compromise, really, that IPSO was set up, and then Impress, thankfully, hasn't really, got a lot of buy-in from the industry, but it just shows, you've got to continually fight for these things. And it's really, I think the sort of nuts and bolts of this are very interesting, aren't they? Because Gareth Roberts, who spoke at a Free Speech Union event, we did his book launch for an event of ours called Time to Get Over the Rainbow, at a really good panel. That's available for members to watch on our website. And he's a gay man who was part of the kind of gay rights movement long time ago. And he's very critical of the kind of grafting on of the sort of trans politicised trans aspect to the lesbian, gay, bisexual kind of fight for rights, which, as far as he was concerned, is over. It was won and that was it. It's done. And so, therefore, I think we all know that at the moment there is a huge debate about what is a woman, what is a trans person, and what is a man. I mean, obviously, it's only ever debated what's a woman, really, but actually all of those different elements are clearly up for debate. Whether people like it or not, it is definitely a subject for debate. So the idea that a newspaper or a magazine, especially like Spectator, that primarily is about comment, people cannot write freely for fear of causing offence on something that's so obviously a very open and live debate, I think is very, very worrying. There was an example that Alison Pearson gave recently. It was an older example, but she was talking about it recently, where she wrote a piece for the Telegraph, and she had used sex-based pronouns for somebody, and editors or sub-editors had changed it. It was an article about, I think, a crime committed by a trans person, a trans woman, who she said used male pronouns for. And the sub-editors changed it, and she really, really very strongly objected, and as did all her readers. And but they said that they were going along with the editor's code, which will be what IPSO is imposing. So it's very worrying when you have this kind of the pressure to distort the
It
truth.
utterly confuses articles. We've seen this with the BBC, but we should move on, I think, Jan, to our next item, which is Bromley Council. Now, this is a really good win, actually. The Bromley Council has adopted free speech protections for councillors into its constitution. And this follows a decision earlier in the year to enshrine free speech in all of its policies and procedures. So the council's code of conduct in Bromley now states that the right to free speech under the law is the basis of democracy and will be upheld at all times. And there is no right to be offended by any lawful speech. And I guess the point here, Jan, is this is, number one, great news, and kind of almost comes out the blue not when we're in the FSU, so we knew it was coming, but for many of our newsletter readers, it may have come out the blue that this has happened, and this really embeds free speech into a local council. But it hasn't, because in the background, we've actually been working with one of our members, Simon Forthrop, to draft those protections. And the target of this new formulation is the vexatious HR-style investigation into politicians, elected officials with lawful but, in inverted commas, offensive views, going back to what we just talked about. So I think this is perhaps seems out the blue. It's not. We've been working in the background for a long time. But it's great news, isn't it, Jan?
Yeah, this is absolutely brilliant. I mean, it's funny actually, because when you hear about local councils and local politics, you can we get so stuck with Westminster that we don't really pay attention to this. But actually, this is where things start very often. And I know, for example, the Reform Party at the moment is obviously really targeting local elections. And I think it is where a lot of things start. So it's very positive. I don't really know the backstory of how this has been achieved. I mean, I don't know. I know it's been going on. I've been hearing about it kind of through the FSU grapevine, even internally. So we'll have to find out this week the full story, because I do think it's really fascinating. If that could become a model that other councils adopt, that people can push for, that they and then I can't see why that wouldn't necessarily apply to other organisations and institutions. It's brilliant. Really,
well, and
really
that's
brilliant.
the key. So when we announced this in the weekly newsletter, obviously this was Bromley, but the key point that was made in that is, if you are an elected official in any other council, get in contact with us so that we can kind of set out the pathway to this and how we did it and what needs to happen. And in fact, over the weekend, we had, I think, at least 5 elected officials, I was checking yesterday on Sunday, have already got in contact with us to say, really interested in this, would love to see it in my council. how do we go about it? So we're collecting those responses at the moment. So if you are out there and you hear this, you look at what's happened to Bromley, and you would like something similar to happen in your council, get in touch. The email is help@freespeechunion.org. That whizzes you straight through to our case team and legal teams who are collecting this together. But as you say, Jen, the thing we forget about local councils, it's not just the bins. It's not just the bins. It really is a lot of our daily lives around around our front door is actually ordained by what our local elected representatives do and say, and certainly the cancellation of elected officials just because of what they think or because of what they say is a troublesome trend. We trip across a lot of troublesome trends, but the cancellation of elected officials is extremely poisonous, I think. So this is all good news.
No, it's good. And at local level, everything's very much more accessible, really. So, I know some members in Brighton who've been, going to council meetings and getting kicked out of them, I think, for making points about what's being taught to children in Brighton schools. And that local level of democracy is actually much more accessible to people than the national level. It's really good, and it comes around much more frequently than our election cycle, the general election cycle. So yeah, all very positive.
Yeah, that's good. Another positive thing, Jan, which is news hot off the press, is an article that hit the Times over the weekend, and it is a call from a police chief, the chairman, in fact, of the College of Policing, Lord Herbert of South Downs. He's called for a complete overhaul of the recording of non-crime hate incidents, NCHIs. He's warning that it has become an impediment to officers doing their job, and that the college is in consultation with Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, about rewriting the guidance governing the recording of NCHIs. But I think, Jan, this is in many ways as a response to the amount of news coverage that these non-crimes have had in the last 6 weeks since Alison Pearson on Remembrance Day was visited by police officers. And then it came out that so many other non-crimes were being recorded and having a real life effect on people's ability to get jobs. And it's really powerful, I think, that the chairman of the College of Policing has now come out and said, we need to think about them. And I think he was asked, would this be up to and including the complete scrapping of them? And he said, perhaps. So kind of everything's on the table as far as he's concerned. And I think we can take some credit for that at the Free Speech Union in terms of the amount of banging of the drum we've been doing to raise this issue. I was listening last night to Free Speech Nation, and the troubling thing about the NCHI story is we thought we'd won when Harry Miller won his Court of Appeal case, and it became clear that NCHIs really don't belong in a democratic society. We don't have a Stasi, we don't have a Checker, and these are going down that line a long way and very rapidly. And yet, the whack-a-mole issue that they are, we can't kill them dead. So this is good news, I think. The more voices we can get writing articles like this and making noise like this, then the sooner is the day when we can get rid of anything that's labelled non-crime, in my humble opinion, I think, Jan.
Yeah, I think again this is brilliant. I mean, it's obviously we'll see what actually all of these things. What actually happens and what actually gets done in operation is another question. But nevertheless, the very fact that this has stayed as an issue now in the headlines for weeks, having been a build, it shows how long things take, how long campaigns take. I mean, when I first joined the FSU in 2020, I think even back then we were already in contact. Toby was already working with Harry Miller and on his challenge to the NCHI against him. And, you can feel how it just takes a really long time. That's four years ago. It takes a long time for these things to build. And yet now we have not just the Telegraph taking up Alison Pearson's case and really fighting for that, but also the Times. So I read the Times every day, and I was reading this morning. This was what I was looking for. So they've been investigating it as well, which is very good. So to have two heavy newspapers really going for this issue. So their stat that was in the paper today is that more than 13,200 hate incidents were recorded in the 12 months to June this year. I mean, it's just extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. And obviously they're the ones that had the headline about children being caught up in this recording, which we talked about a few weeks ago. So I think this is a major issue. And the fact that people have grasped it. They've really grasped this non-crime. I mean, everybody understands that. They all saw Minority Report a number of years ago. If you're of a certain age, I don't know what younger people, what the equivalent is, but this idea of pre-crime, non-crime, monitoring, recording, surveillance, I just think really resonates with people. And as well, I think we talked about as well in previous weeks, this has an international resonance, which means that Britain is up for ridicule. And certainly the police have been up for ridicule. And I think that's a very powerful weapon, actually, against those in authority, which is to hold them to the standards that they're supposedly enforcing. And then in particular, in this case, that point that's always very strong, which is, well, if you're doing this, if you're knocking on people's doors to try to find out what they've said, or rather to accuse them of something they may or may not have said in a tweet, then what's not being done? If your man hours are on a doorstep, knocking on a journalist's doorstep, then what's not being done by the police? And everybody knows.
Stat of 13,200 ties in very closely with the stat from the work we did. So we did a whole bunch of Freedom of Information Act requests, both prior to Suella Braverman's new code of conduct on NCHIs coming in and post Suella Braverman's code of conduct on NCHIs coming in. And we saw, instead of a reduction in the number of NCHIs, and it varied a lot by police force, so it was scattergun approach. Some went up, some went down, but overall, the number actually ticked up very, very marginally. So that code of conduct, which was a huge improvement on what had come before, which was very vague and could have let anything in the gate to be recorded as an NCHR. Again, these codes of conduct, unless there's the will behind it, the numbers don't tick down. These strange animals, NCHIs, don't go away. So we need more of these voices. And I would also just quote as well what in this article the chairman of the College of Policing has said. He said, we want to apply a common sense approach where the police officer would receive a complaint and they would be able to say, we're sorry, we can understand you find that offensive, but it's not a matter for us. That just it's like opening the windows, isn't it, Jan? It's like opening the front door and letting in the clear air. It's so obvious to those of us in the free speech world, but we're not there as a society at the moment.
Yeah, well, that's the thing about common sense, I suppose, is it requires judgment and it requires leadership. So, for the kind of lower level officer, I mean, you're not going to want to go against what you think is your superior's view. Whereas if you have very clear leadership from the top, that will trickle down to the kind of officers on the beat. And it gives those who are very skeptical of having to go and knock on doors of journalists the ability to say, well, actually, are you sure this is what we should be doing? And I think, again, this applies to all institutions. It would also apply to IPSO as well, which is, all of those regulators, that this idea that's come about, which is that, well, we must investigate all complaints. Doesn't matter that they may well be vexatious or trivial or distracting. The idea that people with a grievance have learned that if they claim offence, something will be done. Whether the outcome is what they want, but actually the process will be kicked into gear, and that the person who's accused, that they accuse, will experience some kind of detrimental experience. The punishment is the process, as we often talk
Morality police we seem to have now, Jan. Morality police rather than police officers actually on the beat.
Yeah, with very little morals.
Yeah,
or
where
clear idea of
morality is, as ever with morality police, they also are not very moral. That's been true of religion through the years, and it's true of the state just as much. We should move on to our last item, Jan, which is something that you hosted last week, which is our annual online review where we talk about free speech heroes and free speech zeros. We were very excited last week because it was just prior to the event happening, but it happened and it was fun. So, Jan, what was your perspective on our heroes and our zeros?
Yeah, well, we do. It feels like a long time ago now. I wasn't
Does
wearing a hoodie, that's for sure. I was wearing my annual outing of my gold lame dress. This is an online event that members, all FSU members, are invited to attend, and we had a good few hundred people coming, which is always, it's really good fun. And staff, I think how many members of staff? I don't know, about 10 members of staff
about 10.
proposed their heroes and zeros. So they gave very pithy 3-minute motivations for each of their hero or zero. Which I love, because I love the fact that I strong arm people into taking part, and then actually they really rise to the occasion and do very, very strong motivations, and including you, Tom, because you won.
I know. Well, it must be in the alcohol.
Yeah, that's a good thing. It's our only boozy event of the year, I think. Yeah, so Tom,
The only one we admit to.
yeah, Tom provided a motivation, very good motivation for the hero of the year to be Ayaan Hirsi Ali.
Yeah.
And maybe he could tell you a little bit more about what his motivation was. And I'll just briefly say, to nobody's surprise whatsoever, Toby motivated the case for Keir Starmer to be our zero of the year. And guess what? He won.
He won. It wasn't a difficult one to win, that, I think.
No.
No.
And now I can't remember who the other nominees were. But if members want to watch it, they can go on our website and go to the video section of the website, log in, go to the video section, go to the staff events tab, and then you'll find it there. But you do have to be a member to watch that. But you can see the clips of the hero and the zero motivations on Twitter, on various social media accounts, I think. So, Tom, tell us a little bit about why you motivated Ayaan Hirsi Ali.
So, yeah, Ayaan Hirsi Ali was the hero that I proposed and the hero who ultimately won. And there were a number of reasons why. I listened to Ayaan a couple of times throughout the whole of 2024, actually. She was on a few podcasts talking about the faith she left, Islam, and about the way in which it often clashes with the West, and why, the history of that, and how that worked across multiple countries over multiple centuries since the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Actually, it's quite a long historic story that she tells, but it's very insightful to listen to her. She's wonderfully soft-spoken. So as soon as Ayaan starts speaking, you realize you're talking to someone who's just got such an intellectual approach to things, but she's also passionate and emotional in it as well. So a wonderfully powerful speaker and a powerful writer. So I read This Is Heretic. I read that book by Ayaan, which is Why Islam Needs a Reformation Now. And she's very good at categorizing the different ways in which Islam works itself out in different countries. And so in the context of the APP definition of Islamophobia, particularly, which is looming so large for us at the moment after the new government's come in, it's been spoken about a few times and starting to get kicked against. So the APPG is the all-party parliamentary group definition of Islamophobia. We've talked about it many times. We think it will be a disaster for free expression in Britain. But in that context, she is such a good person to go back to understand the threat that it represents, both because of her personal journey, but also because of the thinking that she's able to put on the table. So that was why she jumped out at me. The only thing I was wrestling with, Jan, is she could have been a free speech hero for any year. What specifically in 2024? Why would we pick her this year? And I think that is why, because the APPG definition of Islamophobia, the new government's direction of travel, rapid direction of travel away from free expression, makes her message all the more urgent, I think. And so that is why I thought of her and proposed her. And she won overwhelmingly. Everyone was obviously got lots of votes, but I think it said a lot about where our members are, how thoughtful our members are. I mean, I know I'm biased because I proposed Ayaan, but she is such a natural pick, I think. In many ways, she inherits from Christopher Hitchens, who we lost too soon. And I think it was great to have her as our hero for 2024.
Yeah, I think, and the very close second was Elon Musk. So, which is unsurprising. And I think there's an interesting difference between them in a way, isn't there? Because I think we look at her and see she very nearly paid the ultimate price herself, having had death threats made against her, needing high security for a very long time, and having lost a very close colleague and friend
Theo Van
who
Gogh,
was murdered. Yes, and I think that those people who pay the ultimate price, they rise up in our our consciousness and our kind of estimation, don't they? Because we may not think that we ourselves would rise to that challenge in the same way, but nevertheless we know that they're more right than we are as soon as we buckle or show cowardice. So I think it's I thought that was great. I was really, really pleased that she won, and a very direct contrast with Keir Starmer in all respects, moral qualities as well as attitude towards free speech.
Yeah.
And talking of the ultimate price, so I wanted to just have a quick run through of the events that we've got coming up in 2025, or the first part of the year anyway. So we've got a fantastic event on the 20th of January that's up on our website. You can book tickets now, we've got Kathleen Stock, philosopher and writer, doing a double-headed conversation with Dora Muto, who's basically the French Kathleen Stock with lipstick, I would say. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way to either of them in any way, but Dora Muto is a fantastic French activist who had a long history of activism in France, has been very brave on a very wide range of issues, but most recently wrote a book called Transmania, which is almost like the kind of French equivalent of Kathleen Stock's book, Material Girls, as a kind of forerunner of opening up the debate in France. So I thought it would be great to bring the two of them together. Kathleen is very familiar with France, French culture and politics, speaks French fluently. Dora speaks English fluently, so I think it will be a great conversation. And that's on the 20th of January, so do get your tickets for that. That's going to be online for members to attend free of charge, but I would recommend that people come in person as well. It's in central London. You can come to that. It's called on the free speech frontline in Britain and France. And as we all know, Kathleen obviously was pretty much hounded out of Sussex University by activists at all different levels, and backroom activists, international journal contributors turning against her, as well as on campus, fellas in balaclavas turning up with flares. But also Dora has had almost even more extreme reaction in France to her book, where she has had direct threats and attacks on premises where they've wanted to organise meetings to discuss the book. So very, very serious threats over there. So what I wanted to explore with them was, why is it that this issue of sex, gender, trans, has turned into this sort of almost pseudo-terroristic issue? And actually, I mean, it is in a way it is terroristic in some of the techniques that are used to silence debate. But why is I don't fully understand why it is that it took that turn. So that's 20th of January. There's still a few tickets, as I said at the beginning, for the comedy night, which is on the 17th of December, so Tuesday night. About 20 tickets left last time I looked. So, but do book them in advance via our website rather than turning up on the door, because chances are it will be sold out by then. 22nd of January, we're in Liverpool. That's our first formal speakeasy in Liverpool, with Toby speaking, generally talking about the kind of state of free speech. Why is it that attacks on free speech are kind of the instinctive reaction from those currently running things? And then 1st of February, I'm just finalising an event in Manchester, which is going to be talking about the regulation of football. So we've got Lindsay Smith, the Newcastle United fan, speaking of that, and Baroness Claire Fox, I'm delighted to say, is also going to be speaking, possibly another addition or two to that panel, talking about how it is that football fans' speech out of the ground is being policed in the case of Lindsay, but also in the grounds there's increasing scope for fan behaviour and fan speech to be regulated if new legislation comes in. What else? 12th of February, we've got a debate on whether a Bill of Rights would shore up free speech in the UK or actually do absolutely nothing to help it. So we've got a brilliant speaker, Professor James Allen, who's coming over from Australia, who's going to be arguing that a Bill of Rights will do nothing to protect free speech. And then he's going to be directly countered by Preston Byrne, who's an American who's coming over especially to make this debate and argue that a Bill of Rights would help, modelled on the kind of First Amendment idea. So that will be good. We don't often do head-to-head debates.
So you're like Father Christmas, Jan. With all those events coming up in 2025, I don't need a stocking. All I need to do is sign up to the FSU for £5 a month.
Yeah, get your rail card and then you go to all the ones around the country.
Get a rail card, go around the country. I think that's brilliant. So events are going to be as exciting as they have been in 2024, but even more so. So
if that was possible. Yeah, go to our website, go to the events page on our website, and I'll keep on adding more over the next few weeks. So there'll be a lot more going up for the new year. Belfast as well, we're planning now.
Well, I have to say, I'm always impressed at both. I mean, you mentioned Claire Fox there, the people we can attract to come and speak to us, and also the fact we go around the country, we visit people in all venues, and the topics which are absolutely on the nail. You know, we had that discussion about in this moment, just after October the 7th, in this moment, how to protest in this moment, what does that mean? And so I think they're extraordinarily relevant to what we're going through. But we should wish all of our listeners and all of our viewers an incredibly Merry Christmas and a wonderful, wonderful beginning to 2025. And despite all of the things we've spoken about, Jan, I hope that 2025 will be a year full of free expression. That is my new term for sort of ending these podcasts. But I hope it will be. I hope that we will continue to fight and be able to say that, yes, we've made progress. We've definitely made some progress this year, even though it feels like we've gone backwards in all sorts of ways. We've been fighting tooth and nail for the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act. We've got that good news that even the police officers are now realizing that NCHIs need to change. There are some very positive things, and we've been able to meet each other and encourage each other and realize we are not alone. You have not gone crazy.
No, 24,000 members. I mean, that's a substantial, and it's not like they're all sheltering from the storm and all requiring our help. They're all people that want to give us a push to make the arguments in the public square, as well as supporting people who fall foul of all the new restrictions. So I think I'm very optimistic, actually.
You love the fight, though, I think, Jan. I think you love the fight.
I do a bit. I've got my Rocky hoodie on.
I've got the music. Eye of the Tiger. Maybe that's the music we should have on That's Debatable. The Eye of the Tiger.
More like to wear it at Pilates than at a boxing gym. Never mind.
Well, Merry Christmas to everyone, and we will speak to you in the new year.
Goodbye.